make sure you're eating the right things raw and the right things cooked. So most plant foods, and certainly all grains, they need to be cooked, and the grains need to be soaked first. But you do need some raw animal foods in your diet, and this might be a little inspiration to go out and find the raw milk in your neighborhood.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Toda Labrada Gore. This is episode 38, and my guest is none other than Fallon Morell, the head of the Weston A. Price Foundation. She is a well-known speaker and author who has committed her life to disseminating critical health information wherever and whenever possible. She came across the life-changing work of Dr. Price decades ago, and she established the foundation to get the word out about it. In today's episode, we discuss principle number 4 of the Wise Traditions diet, that all traditional cultures cooked some of their food and also consumed a portion of their animal foods raw. You'll learn which foods to introduce into your diet raw and which you should cook. Before we dive into the conversation, we want to thank our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported by Real Milk. Real Milk is nature's perfect food, realmilk.com. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. The Weston A. Price Foundation is dedicated to restoring nutrient-dense foods to the diet through education, research, and activism. Visit westonaprice.org. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Sally.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be back, Hilda. Great to be part of this series.
It's so much fun, and I'm learning so much.
Oh, well, good. And we want our listeners to learn also, of course.
Absolutely. I think we're all on the journey together. So tell us about principle number 4.
Right. So we're going through the 11 principles of traditional diets, and number 4 is kind of surprises people. And that is that in all these traditional cultures, some of the animal foods were eaten raw. And, of course, this is in the context of the whole question about cooking. Should we cook our food? Because, as you know, there are people out there saying we should eat everything raw.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But every traditional culture that Dr. Price came across ate some form of their animal foods raw.
That's right. Now, they also, all of them did cook. I mean, every culture that we know of cooked. That's kind of defines what it means to be human, is that we cook some of our food. Or most of our food. And that's basically the plant foods. You know, now all raw foodists are telling us to eat raw plant foods, but mostly the plant foods were cooked. The vegetables, the herbs, the greens were put into the food that was cooking. The grains were always cooked. And cooking makes these foods more easy to digest.
How so, Sally? How so?
Well, a lot of, the cellulose and the starches and everything in these plant foods are very hard for humans to digest. We have very simple digestive tract. We're not like the animals who have
multiple chambers, right?
Multiple chambers in the stomach, or special digestive enzymes, or just a bigger area for digestion. If you look at the gorilla, who's the same size as the man, he has a much bigger gut than the human being does. So he has a lot more apparatus or disc face or whatever you want to call it devoted to digestion. He can pull a leaf off the tree and get nourishment from it. And most leaves human beings can't eat. They're kind of disgusting for us to eat. But then when you look at the animal foods, that's a little bit different because they ate their animal foods both raw and cooked. So what kinds of raw animal foods were they eating? Raw milk, raw dairy foods, raw cheese, raw fermented dairy of many different types. Raw shellfish, of course, just like we do, they'd open them and eat them. Lots of times they ate the meat raw. Sometimes they cooked it and sometimes it was raw and often fermented. For example, they like to, let's take Iceland, for example, they would ferment the shark meat. And that was considered a great delicacy. Definitely an acquired taste.
I was wondering why you were laughing.
Raw insects. Of course, they would just eat the termites or whatever. And raw fish. Now, the Eskimos are a quintessential example of a culture that eats a lot of raw animal foods. That often ate the fish raw or fermented, often ate the meat raw or fermented.
And Sally, they were doing this because their ancestors did it. It's not like they could break down, we know these enzymes or probiotics are good for us, right? But science confirms the benefits of this.
Yes, this is what we like to do. We like to show the scientific validation of traditional food ways. If you ask the traditional person why he was doing this, he would just laugh at you. I mean, of course, why do you have to ask? It's obvious, right?
Yes.
They knew these things intuitively, or you might say traditionally. They would not have a scientific explanation for why they did something. But what's really fun for us at the Weston A. Price Foundation is finding that scientific validation, finding the scientific reason that these things were done. Now, in the case of raw animal foods, we actually don't know all the reasons, but one very important reason is vitamin B6. Vitamin B6 is mostly in animal foods. It's very fragile. It's destroyed by heat. And so when they're eating the raw animal foods, they are getting their B6.
Interesting. And what does B6 do for us?
Well, B6 is one of these vitamins that's necessary for pretty much everything that happens in your body. B6 is particularly important for detoxification. It's very much involved in the detoxification pathways. It keeps all bad stuff out of our bodies. And it's just involved in so many pathways. It's almost impossible to enumerate them.
I see. And those who are proponents of a completely raw diet, I guess, are getting some of these benefits. But you were saying earlier that they're also, unfortunately, not getting the benefits of cooked foods. So it really should be a balance, I'm guessing.
Yes, it's a balance of the two. Now, typically, the all-raw foodist is also an all-raw vegan diet, and they're just promoting raw plant foods. And this puts a tremendous strain on the digestion. Your body has to work really hard to get the minerals out of the foods, get the carbs out of the foods. And that's not what we need to be doing. I mean, the cow or the groundhog that eats only raw plant foods, they eat all day. They eat all day, they're digesting all day, and we have better things to do than that. Now, there's a lot of anthropologists today who've written about cooking and basically make the argument that cooking allowed us to be human, because cooking releases what's in these plant foods and makes them available to us without our having to digest them and break them down. Now, of course, one objection to that is that when we cook our food, we destroy the enzymes, which is true. But what human beings have also figured out how to do is how to ferment our foods. And so when you eat cooked foods with fermented foods, you're getting those enzymes. I like to call fermented foods super raw foods because they more than compensate for the enzymes lost in cooking.
Oh, how interesting. And we've discussed before, for example, how in the German diet they have their sausage and sauerkraut paired together.
Yes.
So that they get the enzymes from the sauerkraut, that super raw food, going with the meat, which gives them the protein and other things I mentioned.
Exactly. And also the fermented foods help us digest fats, very much so. So when you're eating that sausage, you have the fats, and the super raw foods, the pickles or sauerkraut, help you digest those fats. And of course, they taste so good together.
Yeah.
Another great example is the Japanese diet, which is mostly cooked. Even the fish is mostly cooked. Sometimes they eat it raw in sushi, but typically it's cooked. And the rice is cooked, the vegetables are cooked, but they have little pickles that they eat with the diet. And that's a very important component.
Yes, I was going to ask you, how did someone get started in introducing more raw food in their diet? Yeah,
that's a hurdle for a lot of people. Well, first and foremost in the West would be the raw dairy foods. And of course, we recommend raw milk and raw cheese, raw fermented milk products.
What about eggs? I always picture bodybuilders just cracking some eggs and sticking them in their smoothie. Is that good or bad?
Okay,
what do you
we'll
think?
Come to eggs in a moment. But, but I think the raw dairy products is a great way to start. Raw milk is loaded with B6, and in fact, the early experiments with pasteurized milk showed that the animals got B6 deficiency when they were put on pasteurized milk because there was no B6 left. Now, as far as raw eggs are concerned, we caution people not to eat the whites because the raw egg whites are quite difficult to digest and could be highly allergenic. It depends on the person, but If you suffer from skin rashes and things like that, you're not going to want to eat the raw egg whites. But the yolks are just a powerhouse, and that's another great raw food to start with. I just give you an example. In Iran, when they eat the cooked rice, they put raw egg yolks. They mix raw egg yolks in with the rice.
Oh, really?
But you can do a smoothie with, raw yogurt or any kind of yogurt or cream, and add egg yolks and fruit and make yourself a really delicious smoothie that way.
So I can see where the dairy products would be an easy way to get started.
Absolutely.
Now, what about the shellfish? Honestly, I don't have a lot of seafood in my diet. Tell me what raw shellfish we could get started on.
Well, again, would be oysters is the one that people mostly eat raw. And I personally could not eat a raw oyster, but a lot of people just adore them. And, a raw oyster, my goodness, not only is there B6 there, it's a fantastic source of B12, fantastic source of minerals, and, it's great for vitamin D, vitamin A. I mean, a raw oyster is a real powerhouse.
Interesting. Yeah.
Now then we come to the raw meat. And what's really interesting to me, if you go to Europe, every country in Europe has at least one raw meat dish that they eat occasionally. So in Italy, it would be carpaccio. In France, it would be steak tartare. In fact, you find steak tartare in a lot of European countries. In the Middle East, it's kibbeh, which is raw lamb, ground raw lamb. So all of these countries have at least one raw meat dish. They tend to be absolutely delicious. And they're not hard to eat at all. They're delicious. And then we move on to the Orient, and you find a lot of fermented raw meats. I have a lot of recipes for these in my books.
Oh, do you?
In Nourishing Traditions, I have a whole chapter on raw meat and how to eat it.
And do you think people will find, if they go for this, what differences might they find in their bodies or in how they're...
Now, I can personally tell you that when I'm feeling like I need a little oomph, I eat steak tartare. And so that's raw ground beef with some onion and capers and raw egg yolk. And it is a really reviving dish. In fact, it is a dish for the sick in Russia.
Really?
Yes, raw beef and raw egg yolks.
Steak tartare. And what time of day would you eat it? Is that curiosity? Is this a dinner thing?
Actually, I would eat it for lunch.
Okay.
On some sourdough bread with lots and lots of butter.
That sounds so good.
And it's delicious. In fact, we were at a restaurant recently in Washington. I think it was some Middle European country, and they had steak tartare with bacon butter. And it was steak tartare with butter that had bacon pieces mixed in it. I mean, that was so delicious.
Oh my gosh, it sounds great.
Yeah.
So this is not a diet that we're going to be like squeamish about. I mean, maybe at first we'll be a little bit afraid, but once we try it, there's no going back, I guess.
Right, and there's a lot of choices. I mean, if the thought of eating raw meat just makes you gag, well, nobody's going to force you to eat raw meat. But it really can be very delicious. The steak tartare you spread on your bread like pate. So, and then raw milk, raw cheese, that's certainly easy to eat. And some people just thrive on raw shellfish. So there's lots of ways to get your raw animal protein.
Well, I just want to insert an anecdote here. My Masai friends that I met in Kenya recently sent me a short video clip. They had just slaughtered a goat, and then they were literally taking the little kidney and popping it in their mouth and eating it.
I saw that. Eating it like it was an apple or something.
Exactly, yes. They took a few bites. I was like, wow. I don't know if I could do it, but next time I go, I'm going to try.
We'll give you the prize.
Thank you.
The raw meat prize. I remember Mary Ann explained something to me years ago. She said, now, the proteins in meat are very strong and twisted. And when you cook meat, especially if you cook meat gently, they untwist a little, and the digestive enzymes actually can hook on better to meat that's been cooked. So, again, I want to say you want to eat your meat raw and cooked because you'll actually get better protein out of the cooked meat. It's easier for your body to access that protein for you when it has been cooked because the protein fibers untwist and then the digestive enzymes can hook on better. But at the same time, when you're eating your meat raw, you're getting things like B6, possibly also B12 from the raw meat. So you want it both ways.
And aren't those vitamins, those B vitamins, essential for our energy, like you were saying?
Yes, absolutely, for
combating
energy.
fatigue,
mental clarity, neurological function. Yes, for all those things.
And I feel like a lot of people today are struggling with anxiety and brain fog, brain fog.
Yes, so as far as anxiety is concerned, and this is almost epidemic, isn't it? I mean, people are very anxious, sometimes anxious over minor things. Mm-hmm. The first thing I focus on is vitamin A, because we need vitamin A to make stress hormones. And vitamin A, you can get in cooked or raw foods. But yes, the B12 and the B6, which we would get from the raw foods, absolutely, these are very important for anxiety. And I also think just having a high physical energy level is what you need to deal with, the demands and the stresses of modern life. Mm-hmm. And again, as I say, I find eating raw meat extremely invigorating. When I'm feeling like I need a little push, that's when I make the steak tartare.
Sally, what about concern about parasites or something in the raw products that may affect us negatively?
Okay. Well, as far as raw milk is concerned, raw dairy foods, we always say know your source. They should be cleanly produced. But raw milk contains antimicrobial components that kill pathogens and that would kill all these things. So I'm definitely not worried about this in the raw dairy products. Raw shellfish, again, you just want to make sure you see how those shellfish have been stored. Make sure they're really cold. Open them up and put them on ice. You do have to be very careful about shellfish. Now, if you're right down at the ocean and you get an oyster and you open it, then you don't have to worry about that. But for the meat, what we recommend is that you put the meat in the freezer and you freeze it for 14 days. Uh-huh. And then you thaw it and eat it. Of course, keep it cold if you're storing it, or, you're just not going to put that raw meat out in the hot sun.
Got it.
Yeah. And I've had this confirmed to me. I remember talking to someone from the FDA. He just happened to walk up to our table, and I asked him about this, and he says, yes, this is absolutely right. This is what we recommend for getting the parasites out of meat, is to freeze for 14 days. A good cold freezer. And also, even sushi. Sushi is frozen. People think it's fresh fish, but it is frozen, and that is the law. It has to be frozen, and that's the reason for it, to kill the parasites.
Interesting. I didn't know that. We pause now for just a moment to thank our sponsors. Real Milk, pasture-fed, unprocessed, full-fat, nature's perfect food. Find out about the benefits of real raw milk and where you can obtain it at realmilk.com. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. Confused about nutrition? The Weston A. Price Foundation sets the record straight. Find out why butter is a health food, why soy foods are not your friend, and why optimal health is found in the wise food traditions of our ancestors at westonaprice.org. So I'm glad you're mentioning seafood a lot, because I know it's something I want to get more of in my diet. I remember when Dr. Price traveled around the world, didn't he say that among the healthiest people were those who ate a lot of seafood?
Well, Dr. Price found healthy people all over, and whether or not they were eating seafood, if they were on their traditional nutrient-dense diets, they were healthy. But the interesting thing is that he took calipers with him, and he measured. He always asked to see the skulls of the ancestors, and he measured the thickness of the skulls. And it's a good thing to have a thick skull because it protects you from injury. And he found that people with the thickest skulls were the ones who had seafood in their diets. Now, they didn't just have seafood. They had meat as well. But the seafood, something about the seafood helped them have the really strong bone structure. And maybe it was the vitamin A and D I don't know. But that was definitely a conclusion of his, that the seafood helped you have a thick skull.
But now people are really afraid of mercury contamination in the seafood, and they're kind of shying away from it, don't you think?
Exactly. It's another sacred food we demonize, unfortunately. So there's always been mercury in the ocean. The main source of mercury is volcanoes. So people eating a lot of seafood do get exposed to mercury in the fish. And, some cultures eat seafood every day, several times a day. So, why don't they have mercury poisoning? Well, there are a lot of things in the diet that can protect you. And first and foremost are the fermented foods. And Natasha Campbell-McBride, who talks about this, she talked about a study where they gave mercury to sheep. And the sheep that had normal gut flora didn't absorb the mercury at all. Nothing came out in the urine. But the ones who'd been given antibiotics and the gut flora was killed off, they absorbed that mercury and it came out in the urine and presumably also went to parts of their body. So the first and foremost protection against heavy metals, any kind of toxins, is good gut flora. That's 85% of your immune system. Another thing that's very important is selenium. Selenium protects us against mercury, and of course there's a lot of selenium in seafood, so the protection is right there.
And you mentioned fermented food. I feel like that's growing in popularity, which is really encouraging to see.
It's really encouraging. I was recently in a medium-sized town in Healdsburg, California, went into an independent supermarket there. They had fermented foods for sale right there in the supermarket. They also had broth, reductions, and they had kombucha, and they had raw milk. And this was just a kind of a slightly upscale supermarket. So these things are coming, and a lot of times people don't know where they come from. They don't realize that the Weston A. Price Foundation was the pioneer in all this.
That's so true. But now you said it's not a matter of percentages, though, but I'm just wondering, more or less, do you think people should make sure to include something raw in their diet every day? How would you go about it?
Well, the raw animal food, I would say maybe a minimum might be twice a week.
Okay.
That could just be 2 glasses of raw milk a week. So, but I would say twice a week is a good thing to aim for. Now, as far as other raw foods, so let's say raw fruit and vegetables, that really depends on the person, Hilda. Some people cannot do raw vegetables. It's just too much strain on their digestion. And so those people would need to do soups and cook their fruit. Interesting, Mary Annig showed me years ago a study, and this was rats, so it's not humans, but they gave them different kinds of fiber. And then they did the biopsy on the digestive tract, and it was pectin that caused the most damage. And pectin's where? Pectin's in fruit. The Japanese, they think it's bad to eat raw fruit. They cook their fruit. So I think each person has to figure out, what's going to work for them. But eating a lot of raw fruit is not necessarily good for you.
Interesting, because there's also a movement to do a lot of juicing and smoothies and stuff now.
Yes, and I'm very concerned about that. People are juicing things like kale. Kale's indigestible unless it's cooked, and we really shouldn't be eating a lot of kale anyway. It's got oxalic acid in it, it's got goitrogens in it, but to eat it in a smoothie raw is going to be hard on your thyroid gland, hard on your digestion, hard on your kidneys. It's just not a good idea.
Interesting. So we had to be careful about what we choose to eat raw and make sure it's going to work for us.
Yes. And then the last thing I want to talk about is muesli, which is just raw oats, and people take the raw oats and put some milk on it or juice. And I can't stress enough that this is going to give you problems because the grains, they need to be soaked, they need to be fermented, and they need to be cooked.
Now, isn't muesli a traditional dish from Germany or Switzerland or something?
Well, I don't know how traditional it is. I think it started back in the 30s. Some health gurus started doing muesli, but traditionally they cook their grains and soak them for a long time and cook them.
And if people don't notice a problem right away, it will come.
It will come. Yeah, you'll start to have digestive problems. I think muesli started in Switzerland.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so how did they prepare their grains in Switzerland? They grew rye, not oats, and they made a sourdough rye bread. So that's fermented and then cooked. And then they actually hung the bread up and let it cure for another 2 weeks at least, and sometimes for 6 months before they ate it.
Wow.
So it's a long, slow, careful process in preparing these grains. And I think this is so important. So many people have gotten in trouble. Look, we have an epidemic of gluten intolerance and celiac disease, and that followed the huge push in the 70s and 80s for people to eat a lot of whole grains. And they weren't being prepared properly. They weren't being eaten with fat. And look what happened.
Wow. And I think you're right. I think the foundation is one of the few groups that I'm aware of that emphasizes the proper preparation of grains.
Yes. Either they say don't eat any grains or eat lots of grains. I mean, the dietary guidelines tell you to eat lots of whole grains.
Still?
Yeah, without any caution about how hard they are to digest. And then the other extreme is don't eat any grains, they're bad for you. Mm-hmm. And that's not true either. We can include grains in our diet, and I think people want to include grains. They're an important part of the human diet, but we need to treat them with respect.
So the grains don't fall in this raw category that we're talking about today.
Not at all. Grains are not an animal food. So.
And even fruit. I think people reach for the raw fruit because they think, well, this is a healthy choice.
Yes.
And some of them are trying to satiate their addiction to sugar, right?
Yes.
So they're trying to get that fast fix.
Yeah. Now, the tropical fruits are fine raw for some reason, and they have a lot of enzymes in them.
Pineapple, right?
Pineapple and bananas and mango and all that. But things like apples, plums, peaches, just a little word of caution there. Listen to your body if you've eaten a raw peach and see what happens. I personally can't eat raw apples. They really kind of mess me up.
Interesting.
And we do a lot of stewed fruit in our house. I know it sounds very old-fashioned, but I find it easier to digest, and of course I put a lot of cream on it.
That's what I was thinking. You read my mind. I was thinking, with cream.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, we're going to start to wrap up now. What is one thing you would recommend the listener do to improve their health?
Well, of course, the first thing I say is get your fats right.
Mm-hmm.
And get on butter. Get rid of all of the industrial fats and oils from your kitchen. I mean, that's just absolutely number one.
Right.
I think a second thing was, pay attention. What are you cooking? What are you eating raw? Make sure you're eating the right things raw and the right things cooked. So most plant foods, and certainly all grains, they need to be cooked, and the grains need to be soaked first. But you do need some raw animal foods in your diet, and this might be a little inspiration to go out and find the raw milk in your neighborhood. It's easy to do. Just go on our website, westinaprice.org, click on Find Local Chapter, find the local chapter near you, and the odds are he or she will be able to tell you where to get raw milk in your area.
That's right. Yeah. We believe raw milk is rawsome.
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you for your time today, Sally.
Oh, thank you, Hilda.
My guest today was Sally Fallon Morell. For more information on the foundation and the topic we discussed today, just go to westinaprice.org. You'll find all sorts of resources there, including the show notes for this episode number 38.